Welcome to Community Church Unitarian-Universalist virtual service, where we gather each week beyond our four walls to be together in these new and unaccustomed times. The purpose of Community Church is to form a community to practice and advance a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and a commitment to ethical living. As our minister always says, whether this is your first time to attend one of our services or your 101st time, we welcome you. Music director Britt will open with the prelude, "Every Time I Feel the Spirit."
Every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I pray. Yes, every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. On the mountain, I got snow, where the mocking fire and snow. All around me, sunshine, that's my God, if all was mine. Every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. Yes, every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. River Jordan runs right home, chills the body, not the soul. He put one train on this track, runs to heaven and right back. Every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray. Yes, every time I feel the Spirit moving in my heart, I will pray.
I am Reverend Jacqueline Luck, and I am a member of Community Church. Community Church UU is a progressive, open-minded, and inclusive religious community. We welcome all who are on a spiritual search for truth and meaning. Ours is a faith in action as we do the work of justice and elevate compassion in our quest to live ethically. We believe it is not necessary to think alike in order to love alike.
Gathered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in one strong body, gathered here in the struggle and the power, Spirit, draw near.
Britt has been the music director for Community Church UU for 10 years. He has ministered to us through his music and his direction of the choir. He has been bothered lately with arthritis in his hands and a worsened familial tremor and new difficulty with his eyesight. And so Bennett is making next Sunday, his last Sunday, as music director. He doesn't plan to become a stranger to Community Church. He assures me his relationship with love will continue, as it no doubt will be true for those of us lucky enough to know him. Thank you, Bennett.
Thank you.
Please join in singing, as I have been doing, the words to the chalice lighting there in the chat box, I believe, as Bennett plays along. Thank you.
We're like the stranger of the light that and knowledge, and the warmth of love and community, and the fire of hope and faith.
Our opening hymn this morning is number 354. We laugh, we cry, we live, we die. You may know it by heart anyway, and sing along with us.
We laugh, we cry, we live, we die. We dance, we sing our song. We need to feel there's something here to which we can belong. We need to feel the freedom just to have some pride of our own. Most of all, we need close friends we can call our very own. And we believe in life and in the strength of love. And we have found on need to be together. We have our hearts to give. We have our thoughts to receive. And we believe that sharing is an answer. A child is born among us, and we feel a special pull. We see time's endless journey as we watch our baby grow. We thrill to hear imagination and we run wild. We dedicate our minds and hearts to the spirit of His child, and we believe in life and in the strength of love. And we have found a time to be together. And with the grace of age, we share the wonder of youth. And we believe that hope is an answer. Our lives are full of wonder and our time is very brief. But death of one among us fills our soul with pain and grief. But as we live, we slowly die, and when our lives are gone, with every sweet with friends, they will linger on and on. And we believe in life and in the strength of love. And we have found a place to be together. We have the right to grow. We have the gifts to believe that peace within our living is an answer. We seek elusive answers to the questions of this life. We seek to put an end to all the waste of human strife. We search for truth, equality, and blessed peace of mind. And then we come together here to make sense of all that we find. found our joy being together, and in our search for peace, maybe we'll find all you see, even to question truly is an answer.
This is a sacred time in our service, a time for celebrating our deepest personal joys so that we may lift up each other in a time of celebration. And we create a space to hold our most profound sorrows so that we may not grieve alone. Please use the chat box at the bottom of your screen to transmit your joys and sorrows, and I will read them after a moment of silence. Cynthia writes, she has a joy that I was able to go social distancing canoeing yesterday. Sounds wonderful. Alan, joy that the astronauts arrived safely at the space station. Howard writes, my Minnesota roots are deep, and I was always aware of the disparities that underlie the culture of my native home. These truths are in full view, and my heart goes out to George Floyd and family and all who are suffering. I have concern, writes Kathy, about the ongoing protests, especially those that have escalated into riots. We need to do everything in our power to end racism. Alan or Marilyn. I do hope that the world listens to the protests and that things really change. Jim and Vera, we grieve deeply the murder of George Floyd. Dion, I'm sorrowful that revolutions are being redefined as riots, and in most cases because of violent provocateurs are causing them. If America wants peace, it must be peaceful. Scott, I've been checking out this group. It's www.lifeafterhate.org. We will hold in our hearts these joys and sorrows and those that have remained unspoken or unwritten as we go our lives during this coming week, and hold each of you dear and precious, and pray for your health. Our director, Religious Education Director, Cynthia Ramirez, will present this week's Words for All Ages.
Good morning, everybody. My background, of course, is in honor of the SpaceX successful launch and all the astronauts. I'm up there with them. Can you see? Okay. So this is for a poem in honor of Alan Malone's sermon today. It's called Solo, and it's by Patrick J. Phillips. The earth rolls by beneath my wings. My hand dwells not on other things. For as my nose points towards the sky, I can't believe I'm going to fly. The years of waiting over now, my instructor says that I know how. And as the spinning wheels break free, I wish that he were here with me. Higher, higher, the ship is lifting. Racing thoughts, my mind is shifting. What's that he said on the rate of climb? I wish we'd done this one more time. 500 feet, it's time to turn. There is still so much I have to learn. Ease the yoke and now the rudder. The trick is not to make her shudder. 800 feet, another turn. This time there's not as much concern. Throttle back and trim her out. Seems there's less to care about. Downward check now, just in case. Runways on the left, someplace. Carb heat on and lots of power. Oh God, I've got to call the tower. Victoria Tower, I call my name. Why no answer? Is this a game? Radio set, I know it's right. Settle down, no time to fright. Crackle, crackle, I hear him talking. Straight ahead, I'm no time for gawking. Clear to land, it's said and done. Thank the Lord, I'm number one. The heart inside me seems to race as I ease her onto base. Power back, she starts to sink. Easy does it, time to think. Nose up trim at 70 knots, 600 feet is all I've got. Turn for final, almost over, on the blacktop, not the clover. Hold her level till the last. My, the runway's mighty moving fast. Hold the nose up, gee, I'm clever. Seems she wants to fly forever. Thump, I'm down. It feels so good. Nothing to it, I knew I could. Take heart, my friend, and have a try. For now, I know that I can fly. The end.
How wonderful and how perfect. Thank you so much, Cynthia. For the first reading, or the only reading, Alan and I talked about it, and we've chosen one of my favorite poets, John O'Donohue, this morning, more as a holding of all that each of us is going through in our country and the world. This is the time to be slow. Lie low to the wall until the bitter weather passes. Try as best you can not to let the wire brush of doubt scrape from your heart all sense of yourself and your hesitant light. If you remain generous, time will come good, and you will find your feet again on fresh pastures of promise, where the air will be kind and blushed with beginning. It is our prayer. For our offering this morning, I'll read these words. Community Church Unitarian-Universalist is a self-sustaining congregation. Members and friends' generosity help us to do the sacred work of bringing justice, spirituality, and compassion to our community and beyond. If you read in the chat box, you will see some suggestions for what we can do to give, and I'll briefly kind of skim over them. We can go to the website, CCUU NOLA. You know, it seems like that should have 2 U's in it, but NOLA.org/stewardship, or by text. Or you can make a virtual donation knowing that there's a 3% processing fee. So if you're able to add that to your calculations, it would be appreciated. Of course, you can always mail a check into the church at 6690 Florida Lee. Realizing that we may be meeting virtually for a time, I just made arrangements with my bank for online payments. Seems a very simple way to do it. You might want to consider that. We thank you as always for your support in every way for this congregation and its mission in New Orleans and in the world. Our offertory music today is Pierre Vajan Langas. The sermon for today will be shared by Community Church UU's member, Alan Malone. Alan has attended and participated in the first 2 sessions of Reverend Darcy's course on sermon preparation and delivery, called The Shared Pulpit. This has been a seminar taught by our own Reverend Darcy, who is a graduate of Harvard Divinity School. Participants have had the opportunity to write and practice presenting sermons based on subjects of their choice. This sermon, entitled A Sense of Place, is the product of Alan's work in the second workshop, which is open to all members without charge to enhance our understanding of creating a sermon and to also stimulate our thinking about various topics having to do with our personal and spiritual development. It also produces some sermons like this one that members of the class can present to the congregation during the time when our Reverend Darcy is on annual leave and on this joyous occasion on parental leave with her new, as Alan writes, bambino. If you would be interested in attending this course in the future, please make contact with me or with Alan or with our minister, and we can give you more information about these workshops.
Thank you, Jacqueline. And also thank you, Cynthia. That was a very nice poem about your first solo. Something everybody goes through, but and it's a lot of fun after you have done it. This is a story of homelessness. I went through more than half my life, I guess, as a homeless person, a person of white middle-class privilege who's never missed a meal and has seldom experienced the physical and mental feeling of helplessness one often associates with that concept. From the perspective of hindsight, however, I experienced a kind of spiritual homelessness that went along with a particular kind of lifestyle that I didn't notice as abnormal until I was in my mid-years. Where's your home? In the Deep South, I think that question is well addressed by William Faulkner. One of his stories has a character who died in the same bed in which he was buried, he died in the same bed in which he was born 72 years prior. I don't remember the title of the story or the plot, but I was struck with the concept of home that I had never before contemplated. This fellow probably lived under the same roof, or at least in the same community. Other members of his family, including several generations, shared with him. His family members, as well as neighbors, were members of the same culture, including economic level and religion. All experienced more or less the same things during their lives. In the words of T.S. Eliot, they were assured of certain certainties. When the concept of home came up, this fictitious character could definitely have given you an answer to the question of where his home was. The concept of home is probably a bit more complex for most of us. We have developed into a more mobile society since the days in which this story was set. The issue of place is probably for many of us as important as it might have been to Faulkner's characters. To the people with whom we share our lives, other factors such as the requirement of getting to and from work, where we can afford housing, and the perceived quality of our schools near our homes takes precedence over maintaining extended families, cultural norms that were more important in days gone by. When I was growing up, my dad worked for a giant corporation that transferred our family 3 times to entirely different places where it was necessary for us to be in order for my father to climb the corporate ladder. During those years, my sister and I never had the chance to develop a sense of place, in the Faulknerian sense anyway. Our environment consisted of what sociologists call a nuclear family, a Leave It to Beaver, Ozzie and Harriet sort of arrangement, in which Daddy went off to work every day and brought home the family paycheck, while Mom stayed home and raised the kids. It was an insular experience in which there were many times when the parents probably didn't even know the names of their next door neighbors, and neither did we kids, unless the neighbors had kids with whom we associated. Throughout my childhood, if you'd asked me where my home was, I'd probably answer that it was wherever we happened to live at that particular time. My family arrived in the New Orleans area in June of 1956, when I was 14 years old. I did 4 years of high school, 6 years of college, 9 years of skydiving, and a few other odds and ends while living here longer than I had ever lived anywhere else. I met and married the girl of my dreams. You'd think, having been through all of that, I'd finally found a place I could call home. It wasn't quite that simple, however, for me. Habits we acquire in our youth are hard to break. I was reasonably successful, reasonably happy, and pretty well established in life. But if you'd asked me where my home was, I'd probably still declared that, well, I lived in New Orleans. Now, if this were a movie and we had a harp, we'd play some harp music to indicate the passage of time. We've rejoined the story around the end of August 2005. Y'all remember that? I was now in my 60s and was 5 years into retirement from my anchor job. But the two of us had established some small companies, one of which took us to Chicago, where we had been conducting business for a couple of days. We were staying in a very nice hotel which fronted on a city park overlooking the shore of Lake Michigan. We all know what happened next, don't we? Sitting in our comfortable hotel room on a brisk sunny day, temperatures in the low 70s, we watched the cable news network on which a reporter was telling the story of the aftermath of the hurricane that had just missed our city. We weren't paying close attention since the storm had apparently passed off to the east of the city, causing very little damage. As an aside, the reporter happened to mention that there was water on Lower Canal Street. It seemed to be getting deeper as the day wore on. The reporter didn't give it much mention, but we were from New Orleans. We knew that there was a very limited number of things that could cause rising water on Lower Canal Street, which is one of the highest points in the city. None of those were good. We felt like a couple of characters in a Stephen King story. The author using our horrible perception that all was not right to advance his plot, while everyone around us was congratulating New Orleans on another harmless near miss. The news seemed to follow us around as it would have done in a Stephen King horror story. We watched a small screen television set into the wall of our elevator car, keeping everyone up to date on the flood as it carried us down to the lobby during the second day of the developing disaster. I guess I was tearing up a little bit. A lady standing next to me asked what was wrong. I told her that I was from New Orleans and I'd been watching the death of our city for the last few hours. She immediately reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. She handed me the card and explained that she and her husband were from Washington State and that their kids had flown the nest. They were knocking around in a house much too big for the two of them. She wanted to invite us to come and live with them until our situation stabilized. I thanked her and gave her a big hug. A total stranger had just offered me a temporary home right out of the blue. It still kind of chokes me up when I remember her generosity. In the days that followed, many other strangers treated us with kindness and generosity, voicing their sympathy with our plight. We departed Chicago several days later, heading for a place we'll call New Valois. Faulkner actually called New Orleans New Valois in his novel Pylon, and I'll use this as a fictional name of a place where we went in case we might offend anybody who might be from or have connections to the place where we really went. This place was roughly halfway in between Baton Rouge and Houston. 4 people had been nice enough to offer us shelter, and we accepted the one closest to our house, the house whose fate we had yet to discover, since the TV coverage of the disaster seemed always to stop about a mile off where it was located. We planned to stay with our friend for probably about a year, hoping the neighborhood where we lived would be restored to livable conditions in that time. New Valois was roughly 750 nautical miles to the southwest of Chicago. It was going to be an all-day trip in our little 100-knot Cessna. About midday, we stopped at a rural airport just east of St. Louis to gas up the bird and stretch our legs. Somebody had built a small paved strip into the middle of a cornfield. We often stopped at small airports like this because we can usually get faster service at the gas pump if we don't have to wait our turn behind a bunch of jet-powered heavy hitters. Somebody was building a flying community there, and there were lots for sale where we could build a house that had an attached hangar. And that would also be adjacent to the landing strip and the ancillary facilities that comprised the local airport. We could load up the Cessna, open the door, and taxi right up to the gas pump prior to our departing to wherever we wanted to go, knowing that when we got back, we could park the airplane right back in our house. On the face of it, it seemed like a dream place where a golden age retired flight instructor could sit out on the porch of the airport and bat the breeze with other pilots and maybe even teach ground school once in a while. We still hadn't discovered the fate of our property in Metairie, however, and didn't exactly know where we stood financially. So we passed up the chance to start a dream life in what promised to be something like a genuine home. In retrospect, I'm glad that we passed up the opportunity. In talking with people who knew the area, we discovered that it sometimes snowed, which was a no-no for any place that we lived, and that the Mississippi River sometimes flooded. But the clincher was a remark someone made with which I agreed. St. Louis has almost all the amenities of New Orleans, but it simply isn't interesting. Amen to that. I think the essential quality of New Orleans is the variety of its inhabitants and how an extremely diverse collection of citizens manages to mingle, cooperate, and produce a fascinating bunch of attractions, such as food, music, Mardi Gras, the French Quarter. Don't get me started. St. Louis had a baseball team. I've never been very much interested in baseball. So we continued our journey and alighted in New Valois as the sun sank over the western horizon. We built a nest for the two of us in our friend's house, and we settled in. If your doctor ever gives you a month to live, I'd recommend that you move to New Valois. You'll still only live a month, but it'll seem like several years. Excuse me, but I'm a city mouse, and some of you may be country mouses. After a month, the next hurricane, whose name was Rita, came along, forecast to come ashore near Houston. I figured I'd better move the airplane to get it further away from ground zero, so I planned a trip to Baton Rouge the following day. The next morning, very early, Marilyn shook me awake and told me to get going. Rita had taken a jog to the right and was headed right for New Valois. I hurried out to the airport and got the sturdy bird headed toward our state capital, post haste. Looking down at the highway, I saw bumper-to-bumper traffic. Once again, thanked the Cessna gods for my good fortune in not being among them. Rita's eye went directly over New Valois, wrecking the house where we had been staying. We decided to get back and check on how our house was doing. The news was good. By the time we reached our house, which was still intact and reasonably dry, the electricity was back on, the water and gas were up and running, and we could even receive the 3 local TV stations. A group of school teachers was living in the house next door. We did some partying with them while we cleaned up the yard and did the many other things necessary to return to a life of normalcy. In the months that followed, we took in various friends who had been uprooted by the storm and who needed a place to stay until they could get their houses repaired. A handyman who used to do odd jobs for us moved into the garage apartment we had in back and made himself useful, helping us with cleanup and repairs. That was 15 years ago, and we are now enmeshed in the coronavirus pandemic. Instead of being holed up in a Chicago hotel and a nice suburban house in New Valois, we are, as this is being written, quarantined with all the comforts of home, except that it looks like we'll have to do without parties and other fun activities with our friends for a little while. We've lost one of them to the virus, and we have our teeth clenched, being in one of the hot spots that we share with maybe 500 of our closest friends. Being connected with that many people guarantees that we'll lose some more of them. Sooner or later, in fact, we're going to lose them all. But we've resolved not to let that spoil the rich experience of whatever remains to us. Sometimes you get a chance to take a step back for a new perspective on what you value. In my case, the prospect of losing the culture, the institutions, the people, and the colorful environment that is New Orleans made me realize that this place had truly become my home during the many years I had been living and working here. It's 15 years past the flood, and we're still living in our terminal house in Metairie, having decided that we'd rather drown in New Orleans than live in a place like New Valois. New Orleans is one of the richest, quirkiest, funniest cultures on the planet, a place I'm delighted to share with a large group of family and friends, a place I have come to treasure as my home. That's what I have to say about that subject, but I'd like to encourage everybody to stay after the service for coffee hour. I'm sure we have some very more serious things to talk about, and I hope that you won't take this as a whiny statement of a privileged white man. I have some deep feelings about the horrible week that we've just come through. I look forward to talking to my friends about that. Thank you very much.
since you've ended with a couple of announcements, I want to also remind folks that I voted this week. I hope you did, on our slate of new officers. Since I was on the nomination committee, I certainly am very enthusiastic about who we have listed. If you didn't do that, I found it in an email. It's probably on the website too. And then there's been a note here from Kathy Larimer that we have a congregational meeting next Sunday, which after the service instead of a coffee hour. And everyone needs to attend, as you know how important these meetings are. And we have to have quorums. I don't know how they're going to work that, but you need to be there. So with that, I have words of a benediction. May the love that gives to life its beauty, the reverence that gives to life its sacredness, and the spirit that gives to life its deep significance be strong within each of you and lead you into an ever-deepening relationship with the eternal mystery of life. That is the end of our service. Thank you, Alan. It was a wonderful sermon about home. We appreciate it. Thank you, Bennett, very much. Cynthia, your story poem was wonderful. Thank you all. If you'll please stay tuned, maybe grab a cup of coffee. In 10 minutes, we'll have a virtual coffee hour led by Dion DeVille. Thank you.